Welcome, everyone, back to the School Leadership Show. With me, as always, co-host Jen David Lang. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Mike. Good morning.
Good morning. This is a rare treat for us, recording in the morning. I feel all bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, fresh as the morning dew. And with us, a very special guest. I've been looking forward to this conversation, Jen, ever since you told me about Tom Bennett. Tom is the author of Running the Room, the Teacher's Guide to Behavior. Tom Bennett, where does this podcast find you this morning?
I am in the beautiful Scottish countryside, surrounded by sheep. I can see stag and haggis and all kinds of animals leaping around in the background. It's a pleasure to be here, Mike. Thanks very much for having me.
So kind of like Brooklyn, New York, right?
It's more like, it's like Brigadoon. I don't know if you remember Brigadoon. That's where I am right now. It's like Highlander or something.
I can't even. So Tom, you didn't come to education in the traditional way. Can you tell folks a little bit about your background and how you got where you currently are?
Sure. I went to university and studied philosophy, which meant I was unemployable. So I ended up in the kind of the liquor and gin world of speakeasies, running nightclubs in Soho, in London's West End, which is like a natural transition into teaching, as you can imagine. And after about 10 years of that, I remember thinking, this isn't really going anywhere. And I became a teacher. And so that was kind of I don't know if there is a normal route into teaching, but that was my normal route to teaching. It was the only one I had.
I'm not sure nightclub to teaching is traditional here in the US, but maybe it's different for you.
Well, it's quite common over here. This is what we do.
It doesn't feel like a straight line, but all right. So what did you teach when you started teaching?
Well, I don't think this is a subject you really have in the States. I taught the religious studies and philosophy, which, for those of you unfamiliar with it, it's not what you would call confessional religious studies. It's like teaching about religions. It's more like it's sociology, it's history, and so on. It's also philosophy, ethics. So it's kind of a very much a UK subject. I loved it. I absolutely adored it. You could teach so much with it, and you could go to so many different places with it. But the important thing was you weren't teaching the kids to think what you thought. You were teaching them to think more broadly about the world. I adored it, but yeah, it's been a while.
So how did you get interested in behavior? Because it's definitely an interest of mine. I have a lot of background in special education, and behavior is communication, as we know. So how did you get into behavior?
You're such a tease. It's kind of like a bad Russian joke. I didn't get interested in behavior. Behavior got interested in me, comrade. I walked into the classroom and I became a teacher at the age of 30, already an old man. And I thought that would be a cinch. I thought that I could just walk into the classroom and, I was confident. I can talk to people. I was used to managing crowds and drunks. And there's a lot in common between drunks and angry children. And if you don't believe me, try to get either one of them in or out of a cab. I remember thinking this will be great because I love my subject. I love kids. They're all going to be jumping on the desk shouting, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," in about 30 seconds. But you know what? Can I just say, how many teachers became a teacher because they saw that damn film? Honestly.
Oh, that film! I can't with that. No.
They should be sued. They should sue them. Anyway, so I went into teaching, and all these great intentions were just dashed against the cliffs of these children's complete indifference. They couldn't give a damn how much I loved them, or how much it meant nothing to them. And why should it? It's not magic. I remember thinking, wow, these kids are really tough. This is hard. And they used to run around me like a pole. And it took me about 10 years to even realize that there was such a thing as behavior management. I, like many teachers, just thought, hey, I must be rubbish. I'm just really bad at this. And then it took me years to realize that I had never been trained in any of this whatsoever. Nobody had ever shown me how to do anything at all in behavior management. So I feel a lot more sorry for myself in the old days, because I used to be really hard on myself, thinking, my God, I'm just the worst here. But I now realize that how can you know how to do something you've never been shown how to do? There's this kind of really crazy idea that if you're interesting, they're going to behave. or you care enough, they're going to behave. I mean, neither of these things are true. It's just not true. You can't make people behave like that. It doesn't work like that. People's minds don't work like that. But these are forgive me, these are the kind of lies you're sold in teacher prep. That, there's something wrong with your lesson.
Right. If the lesson's engaging enough, they will behave.
Yeah, and this is like one of those like weasel words in education, because I mean, sure, if they are engaged with your lesson, then they're going to behave. But the question is, how do you get there? Engagement isn't a direct property of the material you're giving them. I mean, one of my favorite things is like, the King Arthur stories. That's my bag, right? And but I'm engaged in that stuff, but not everyone is. And you can't just put it in front of someone and say, this is engaging. How do you get kids to be engaged? Now that's the rub, as they say.
And I like that you start in the book with some of these common myths, because I think we all grow up with these myths, whether from television or movies or whatever. So, certainly some of these myths run wild in the US, if your lesson is engaging enough. And, are there any other myths out there that you think we should address with our audience?
How long do we have? I frequently find, I don't have hours. I frequently find that in the UK, and I'm going to speak about the UK first of all, which is that there's almost no training in behavior management. Like, you get half an hour of training in behavior management, and then good luck. Just love the kids, it'll be great. And I often find that in the UK in particular, there seems to have been this massive displacement of teaching expertise when it comes to behavior management. And lots of people in the teacher prep industry themselves couldn't manage a difficult classroom. Now, I want to be really careful here before people start throwing their smartphones out the window. There's loads of great people in the system, but I just found there was lots and lots of people who didn't know how to manage a class, had these really crazy ideological ideas about running a class, and were just propagating these essentially 19th century philosophical, Hallmark calendar aphorisms at people and saying, just go for it and do it. So, for example, I mean, Mike alluded to it quite spikily at the start there, that all behavior is communication. I mean, I find that just one of these slightly facile universal statements that people make. I mean, sure, all behavior can tell you something, but sometimes what the behavior is communicating is exactly what the behavior is. If a kid throws a pencil at another kid in a classroom, you don't sit there and ruminate for hours upon, I wonder why they did it. I wonder what deep unmet psychological need is driving them. Let us confer, let us assemble the council of elders. This is nonsense. People very frequently act the way they do because that's just the way they like to act. And it's down to very normal human behavioral causes and inspirations. If a kid says, sir, I don't like your lesson, you're dull, I don't go home and think, what have I done wrong? I think that kid's kind of rude, and they need to learn. That's not how you speak to people in general, no matter how you feel about your lesson. So, behavior is an unmet need. Behavior is a communication. All of this it sounds great, but it comes from like the wellspring of 19th century philosophical progressivism, very little of which is any kind of scientific foundation whatsoever. Behavior is more and less complicated than that.
So talk about how it's less complicated than that.
Well, now you put me in the spot. How can I say things as simply as possible, but no simpler, as Bertrand Russell once said? I think that when it comes to behavior, in a mainstream school environment, the vast majority of what we call misbehavior is what kids call behavior, right? It's just how they like to behave. Now, kids are, I am reliably informed, human beings, okay? Now, you can correct me on that, but I think they are. And they're kind of like us. They're frail and fallible. They're angels and demons. They're all the good and all the bad stuff in us. Now, I'm going to use myself as an example here. I can be grumpy. I can be tardy. This sounds like a song. My apologies. This is like, is it Mika? Sorry. I can be all these great. I can be nice. I can be kind. I can do all these things in my normal day-to-day life. I don't need to be taken apart and dissected on a psychoanalyst's chair for everything that I do. A lot of what I do is because I enjoy what I do, and these are my habits and these are my responses. And so when you are dealing with behavior in a classroom, 90% of misbehavior in a classroom is just normal human conduct, which doesn't mean it's okay, but it doesn't mean that we need like a psychologist note to excuse what people just do naturally, that we accept as just normal spectrum behavior. I would argue about 5-10% of misbehavior is caused by other things going on in kids' lives, difficulties, psychological circumstances, cognitive impairments, language and speech disorders, and so on and so on. Absolutely. But most of what you meet in a mainstream classroom environment is kids mucking about, people being people.
So it sounds like you're saying that we, as the adults in schools, tend to overcomplicate things, looking for solutions in search of problems, perhaps.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I think, to be honest, I think we pathologize a lot of normal spectrum behaviors. I think we medicalize a lot of normal spectrum behaviors. That when a kid is rude, it might just be because the kid wants to be rude.
Or maybe, right.
Sorry?
Doesn't mean he needs medicine.
It doesn't mean you need medicine or therapy. It doesn't mean we need to go, that poor kid, he can't help himself.
I think one of the analogies you gave in the book helps adults to understand, right? So a lot of us, we want to stay in shape, right? We want to get into shape, but then we find ourselves on the couch, right, eating potato chips. So, right, and it's just, that's normal, right? That you have these two sides, as you said, in yourself. And so I think what you're saying about kids is the same thing. They're equivalent of wanting to behave whatever, get in shape, but also wanting to talk to the kid who's on the other side of the room when you're in the middle of a lecture.
Absolutely. I speak for yourself, Jen David Lang. My body is a temple. I've never seen a potato chip in my life. or crisps, as we call them. Anyway, potato chip. What is this? Anyway, my point is that we're frail and fallible, and I struggle doing the right thing all the time, and kids often struggle to do the right thing all the time. And what I'm really grateful for is that when I was a young kid, I had a significant number of adult role models in my life who were kind enough and believed in me enough to set boundaries, but also to teach me to do the kind of things that would help me to succeed as a human being, i.e. being polite, waiting my turn, being patient, sharing, working with others, being cooperative, that kind of stuff. These are the habits and life skills and behavioral skills that we often take for granted, and boundaries and consequences for those boundaries. And basically a mixture of, kind of what your grandpappy would probably think of as parenting is a lot of what teaching's about as well, to some extent.
So you've started down that road. Let's continue a little bit. So you talked about your philosophy of student behavior, but maybe put it in the context, your approach to behavior management, perhaps in the context of the biggest mistakes that rookie teachers make, and how would you coach a new teacher to really understand student behavior and to manage it in a way that makes sense. It maybe at least 20th century, maybe not 19th century. I mean, can we hope for 21st century? I don't know.
21st century, my God, you underachiever. What's wrong with the 23rd century, Mike? Don't you care about children? Why do you hate them? Okay, so the first thing is to remember that children aren't born with the behaviors that they need in order to flourish in the classroom environment. They're not born with these behaviors. Nobody is. Most of our behaviors are instinctive, like flinching and blinking, but that's no good to us in the classroom. It's a hard thing to rely on. So most of the behaviors that we're interested in are social rituals. They're taught to us by people after we've been born, or we're immersed in our environment, which basically means that behavior is a curriculum. It can be taught, it can be learned. And lots of kids are fortunate to come from advantaged socioeconomic circumstances where they are taught these social habits and rituals that help them to do really well in an institution with other people in groups. Some children don't have as much of that. And some children come from really toxic backgrounds where they get either toxic habits or toxic behavior patterns, imbued and taught to them from an early age or stage. And the job of the teacher, to get this back to the classroom, the job of the teacher is to really teach this behavior curriculum on the understanding that lots of kids don't know where you want them to sit, don't know how you want them to, take a seat or pass out a book, or what to do when they're stuck or sad or need to go to the toilet. And all these basic behavioral skills that we have and they don't. And we take it for granted because we're experts at it. And often, and this is called the curse of expertise or the curse of knowledge, often because we're so good at it, we think everyone can do it. And guess what? They can't, or some of them can't. So the first thing a new teacher needs to do, and this is where it gets easy, but hard to implement, is you got to lay out your stall. You got to tell people really explicitly, really clearly, hi, welcome to the class. I care about you. I want you to do well. I want you to succeed. I believe you can. I believe you can. You matter to me. And that's why we're going to do this. And you lay out your rules and your expectations, not because you're some kind of draconian tyrant who believes in oppressing children, but because you care about them enough to say, here's how you succeed in my classroom. Because when you don't, when you take the kind of the, I don't know, slightly more progressive route of, I'm not going to teach you how to behave. The behavior will just come from within. You may as well teach them mathematics that way.
Remember when that's how we used to teach reading?
Absolutely.
They would just figure it out.
Just happen, magically and beautifully, And if it does for 1 in 100, like Tarzan in the Edgar Rice Burroughs novel, then it doesn't for 99 out of 100. And it's the same with behavior. You are condemning children to flounder in environments in which they don't understand what to do, and they bump up against the buffers of that environment, and they get in trouble. And they think the behavior is about misbehavior, and they think, oh man, I must be a bad kid. This is like teaching children this is like teaching people how to drive a car by saying, don't hit anything. That's not how you teach anybody a damn thing. I don't teach you German by saying, don't speak French. I say, here's how you do it. Here's how you behave in this lesson. And 99% of kids will go, okay, phew, now I know where to put my chair. Now I know where to get a pen. Now I know what to do if I'm late or how not to be late.
Well, and I think it goes to, this whole idea that, we can't expect a child to behave unless all of their needs are met on Maslow's hierarchy. But what you're talking about here is helping students meet those needs, because knowing what to do, there's a sense of comfort, and that reduces anxiety. And that, if it's hard to meet an expectation if you don't know what it is.
Absolutely. I mean,
it's demystifying, right? You're demystifying what it is, as opposed to having all the expectations in your head about, you expect to walk in, teach a brilliant class, and have everyone pay attention. Instead, you're telling them, you're not just telling them what to do, you're teaching them, but you're also, I really like that you talk about creating safety in the classroom, and not safety as in, don't hit each other, trip over each other, but the kind of safety that they matter, and starting with that whole aspect of, you are human beings. I will treat you with dignity, and you matter. And now here are the rules that I have.
Oh, absolutely. I kind of just say, I think you've really hit something really important here about meeting needs and so on. Now, Maslow, I love Maslow's hierarchy. It's really important. And I refer to it all the time, but it is also responsible for a lot of chimera and mutations in the wild. Let me explain what I mean by that. When you say that everything that somebody wants is a need, then you imply there's a responsibility for someone else to provide it. Now, somewhere we don't want to go is that in Maslow's hierarchy, in the physiological category of needs, there's air, there's water, there's food. And obviously these are big motivators, but he also includes procreation. Now that's a dark alley to go down in terms of, it's somebody's duty to provide it. And there's a whole lot of people on the internet that want to talk about that. But my point is this: these are desires, these are cravings that we strongly have. People really need to, want to have these things, like, for instance, to be valued, to feel safe and secure. And I see them as utilitarian motivational tools. If you want kids to do well in your classroom, they need air. I'm trying to take it as a given. Give them oxygen for a start. But also make sure they're rested, make sure they're fed. That's why we have breakfast clubs and stuff like this. Okay. But also make sure they feel safe. Make sure they don't feel like they're going to be threatened. The staff need to feel this too. And then above that, they need to feel valued. And if they can get all of this stuff, I call it Maslow's goods, from doing the right thing in a classroom, they will run towards it. Or many of them will more than they would have done before. But if they don't get it in your classroom, they'll try to find these things in other ways. So if they don't feel powerful or safe, they'll do things to make themselves feel powerful or safe. They might form gangs and so on. Or if they don't feel valued, they'll do something which draws attention to them so they feel important, given that people can often be attracted to toxic levels of status, as well as healthy, positive levels of status. So you got to provide people with these things, sure, but as a means to an end. If you get a kid who tells another kid to F off or something like that, pardon me, I don't know how far we can go with
we can go as far as you want. We can mark this one
Absolutely.
explicit if you would like.
Well, in that case, if you got a kid that says this, you could look at the kid and think, oh, what does he really need? I mean, one of my responses to that is, well, he needs to learn not to tell people to F off. That's what he needs.
That's what he needs to learn.
And I need to get busy with that.
So let's go down that road. So 87% of statistics are made up on the spots. But let's say you have this rookie teacher who has taught the behaviors, who has actively worked with students to teach them how to behave appropriately in class. But there is going to be some percentage of kids, perhaps all of them at some point, who are going to need the teacher to respond in some way to manage behavior. So take us down that road. What are the strategies that you teach teachers to help them manage behavior, assuming they've done all the appropriate pre-work?
Sure. Okay, fine. Well, first of all, the pre-work is part of it, but the pre-work never stops. I always say to teachers, behavior is often like pedagogy. You got to keep teaching it, otherwise people forget it. The Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. People forget stuff. They lose habits. They drift. This is why the gyms are full in January and empty in February. So there's that. So never stop teaching this stuff. Remind them all the time. Cue them before they have to do it. Remind them once they've done well, and so on. But okay, more broadly, what do you do when the behavior starts to drift? So first of all, keep teaching it, keep reteaching it. But then now we're talking about consequence systems. Now, if behavior is a pedagogy, one of the great things is we know a lot about pedagogy. And one of the most evidenced foundational pieces of research we have in the science of learning is that one of the best things you can do to help somebody learn something, to reinforce it, is to give them formative assessment, to give them high quality feedback, assessment for learning, that type of idea. So once somebody's done something, you give them high quality feedback on what they've just done. Now, every driving instructor does this. This is, they correct what you've just done and ask you to do it a different way, or you say, well done. Kids need to be immersed in this feedback. And that feedback also acts as a cue for future behavior. So some of that can just be reminders. Okay, I noticed you're starting to do this. I need you to do that. Some of it can be cautions, warnings, prompts. You can use your interpersonal skills. You can tap the desk or give them the hard stare like Paddington Bear. You do what you want, right? Or you can just say, listen, do you want some help? But in terms of slightly more, shall we say, stiffer consequences, this is where we now get into the behaviorist territory of sanctions and rewards. And pardon me, my justification for any kind of sanction is simply this, that if you have acceptable desired behavior, you've got to have unacceptable behavior too. There's got to be a limit to what kids can do. Otherwise, you're saying, yeah, that's sure, fine, stab somebody, tell someone to F off. It's up to you. Of course, it's not, right? So that has to be boundaries. And if your boundary doesn't have a sanction consequence, then it's no boundary at all. If you say to people, do this, or what, or nothing will happen, then 5% of people will go, fine, I don't care, let's keep going. And the analogy I always use, and I use it in the book, is driving. If you want people to drive really well, teach them how to drive. I mean, that's a great start. Ideally, you would have to resit your test every 5 years or something, but I don't know any country that's ready for that apart from North Korea. But what you then have is boundaries of acceptable conduct, speed limits and give way signs and stop signs and all these kind of things, and consequences for not obeying these signs. And my favorite analogy is the speed camera on a highway or a motorway, as we've seen say in the Queen's England, which is that you've got a speed limit, and when you exceed it, the camera flashes and boom, you're caught and you get penalized, you get fined for a low level fine, but something nonetheless to deter you. Now, does that sanction work for everyone? No, because some people don't care. Some people just want to see the world burn. Does it slow down people forever? No, because once people get around the corner, boom, punch it, Chewie, and it's hyperdrive round off to the next intersection. But the point is this, it reduces the frequency and severity of the behavior, right? You got to have consequences, you got to have sanction boundaries. And the best way to interpret this is to be as predictable as possible, because when people believe in your sanction boundaries, when people believe the speed camera is going to flash, that's when they are most deterred by the worry of some kind of caution or sanction. It's not that you want to manage behavior by the sanctions. They are your backstop of unacceptable conduct. You want to manage behavior by the teaching of behavior, but you need that backstop to remind people you are near to crossing a line and we will not permit this. There.
That's spectacular.
How was that?
And that was delightful. So let's get into, and we're getting close to time here. I want to be sensitive to your time, but all the rage these days, right? Restorative practices will fix everything. That they are the panacea.
Yeah, sure.
That's how you think, right, Tom?
Let me loose, mate. Hold me back. Okay, listen. There have been. I grew up in the 70s, right? So I'm used to things that are fashionable but terrible. And I think the restorative practice is one of these things. I want to be quite clear here. Restorative practice has some function. It is a tool. It has utility. It has use. But I would be the worst tradesman in the world if I thought that my screwdriver could fix everything. And yet that's the way that some people seem to approach restorative practices. Restorative practices, some people claim it comes from ancient Maori culture. Some people claim it comes from ancient indigenous cultures. Yeah, you could argue this for centuries. Modern restorative practice, as we know it in schools, comes from the prison system, right? Which is often overlooked. And it's basically this idea that rather than just, ladling more sanctions upon people, let's maybe see if we get to talk through their issues and their problems. And you can absolutely see the point of this, because there comes a point at which sanctions alone are a diminishing return in terms of the effectiveness they have. Or to put it another way, if somebody's in prison for life and you say, you've got another life sentence, it's not a huge deterrent. And I've seen some people in the States, they've got like 55 consecutive life sentences. And I'm just thinking, where are they going with this? Anyway, I digress. So when it comes to restorative practice, this idea that you can restore a relationship rests very strongly on the idea that there was a relationship in the first place to restore. So it's quite a useful tool when, for instance, two friends have had a fight and you use a moderated, mediated process to say, look, let's hug it out, let's be pals again. But I've also seen it done, frankly, in an almost abusive level, when, for instance, a victim and a bully have been brought together in a mediated conversation and they're supposed to restore a relationship. This bully might have sexually harassed that person for years and years and years, and they're supposed to talk it out. This is beyond nonsense. This is almost satire. This is cruel. A child in that situation just wants their aggressor to not be with them anymore. Go away, take them away from me. So I couldn't agree less with this idea of restorative practice. It is highly inefficient. It is a mockery of providing acceptable levels of safeguarding and care-inspired boundaries for children. It is a tool which we can use sometimes, but a lot of people can exploit restorative practices. They know what to say in order to get out of the practice as quickly as possible. It just becomes another conversation where they nod along and move along. And I am tired, Mike, of going into schools and clearing up the mess of schools that try to go fully restorative. In the words of Tropic Thunder, never go fully restorative. It is not an effective or efficient way of managing a community. You show me the community in the real world, beyond perhaps a family unit, which has relied on restorative practice as a way of maintaining its boundaries and optimizing its conduct. It has never existed. It is fanciful, it's ideological, it's not a great idea.
So tell us how you really feel. No, go ahead, Jen.
I love it. I think it's great. Apart from that, it's brilliant. Apart from that, I love the play.
But no, I think that that this fits within one of the points that you make over and over in your book, which is that one approach isn't going to work for everyone, right? So you find a kid who they're grumpy, they're cranky in your class, they didn't eat, and you're like, oh, snacks for everyone, right? Great, snacks for everyone, but that doesn't mean that's going to solve it for everyone. And so you really say, right, in the same way, restorative practices aren't going to work for everyone, sanctions as a deterrent aren't going to work for everyone. So you really do need to learn a series of tools of the trade to be able to fully manage a class with a fully diverse set of students.
Absolutely. If you try to run a school purely on sanctions, you'll also come a cropper. You'll probably move a lot more children a lot more in the right direction, but you'll also break some kids, and some kids will be disproportionately affected by the influence of that. And my strong suggestion is that I see a school. This is my favorite one. I see a school like a hospital. Everybody needs the same level of general care. Oxygen, food, cleanliness, sterility, being checked on, and so on. But then some people need oncology, some people need pediatrics, some people need whatever, some other specialism. And people need different things, but everyone needs mostly the kind of broad range of stuff, like the clear, consistent boundaries, high expectations. We care about you. We want you to do well, top behaviors and so on. And this works for like 95% of kids. And then 5% of children will need more boutique circumstances. As you say, not every child is hungry. So you'd have to feed every child, but some children need to be fed.
And the other thing you say is that it also involves both you give the analogy of a fire, right? That there's the fire brigade model and the fire prevention model. And just so listeners know that Tom has a lot of these specifics in the book, like what do you do to prevent the fires, but also the fires are going to come, right? So what are you going to do when the fire is there? So I really appreciate it in your book that you have a lot of the specifics about establishing rules, routines, scripts. We won't go into them now, but they're fantastic specifics in your book. But I do wonder, I know we're a little over, but just one question. The reason why I chose your book now is because I'm hearing from a lot of schools with 2 years of pandemic that behavior has gotten worse. So can you speak to this point in time and why this is important right now?
Yeah, so basically, I've got a couple of roles here, but my main role over in the UK is I'm the UK Department for Education's behaviour advisor. So we've been tracking this quite closely throughout the pandemic. And one of the things that I was fascinated by was what effect would this have on people? Now, what we found is that when schools gradually started to reopen again, I mean, most UK schools never shut. They were still open for the most underprivileged children. But anyway, when the cohorts came back, we found the evidence, like the Scarecrow in the Wizard of Oz, was pointing in all directions. There's some schools were saying the behaviour's better, some worse, and some it's kind of the same. And once we looked closer in the data, we found perhaps a tale as old as time, which is this: the children who came from advantaged circumstances tended to be more resilient to the effects of things like lockdowns because they had supportive, nurturing family homes, gardens, parents who had the time to invest homeschooling and so on. And then you come from people from less fortunate circumstances who perhaps through no fault of their own didn't have the time to do that. Children who watch television all day, children worse who existed in abusive or toxic or traumatic environments. This is the range. Now, advantaged demographic schools tend to have fewer of those latter kids. So they tended to be doing okay. And some kids came from environments didn't do so well because they came from worse situations. And schools that had a mixture of these kids had a mixture of results in this. So what we find is that when kids have been at home for a year, 2 years, or have missed school for a long time, they've lost the habits of socializing optimally in an institutional setting. They might have, it took me about a year to put a shirt on, it was a long time for me. I'm a grown adult. So kids lost these habits of extended focus, motivation, focusing study on something they're not interested in. And these are very much what we're about in schools. So we shouldn't be surprised that kids have lost a lot of their habits, and staff too.
And it comes back to where we started, teaching. This is about teaching. It's about teaching behavior, about teaching students what they need to do. The book is Running the Room, The Teacher's Guide to Behavior by Tom Bennett. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. What a fantastic conversation.
My pleasure. Love to talk to you guys.
Now, before we go, I feel like I need you to say a bunch of lines from Mike Myers movies to make. So move. He'd pants. No. Could you please say?
Sputnik.
It's like an orange on a toothpick. Could you say, shut your cake hole?
Shut your cake hole.
Yes.
How's that?
That is all I needed, and I think I'm leaving it in.
Like, can I just say,
Mike's gonna leave it in.
I eat because I'm unhappy, and I'm unhappy because I eat. Anyway, moving on.
This is so great.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Keep it proud for Scotland. Thank you very much. Great to speak to you guys. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.